Hello and welcome to Calmversations with the Voice of Reason. I'm your host, Benjamin Boyce, and today's Calmversant is Raw Egg Nationalist, who's a social media influencer and raw egg enthusiast and the author of several books, including The Eggs Benedict Option and the magazine Man's World. In this conversation, we talk about manhood, fatherhood, the effect of testosterone on politics and behavior, and what's going on in the UK and the United States with regard to our bureaucratic apparatus that's seeking to encroach more and more upon the natural rights and liberties of we, the people. You can find links to Ren's work down in the description below. If you enjoy this content, consider liking, subscribing, and donating, also via the links below. Without further ado, here is Raw Egg Nationalist.
Hello.
Oh, there we are. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks. Not too bad. I finished the first draft of my new book an hour ago, so
Oh, how you feeling?
yeah, great. Yeah, really good. Yeah.
Yeah. Which one is this?
So it's going to be called The Last Men, Liberalism and the Death of Masculinity. And it's kind of following on from the themes of the Tucker Carlson documentary that I was in, The End of Men, about testosterone decline and the political implications of testosterone decline.
Is it possible to be a liberal and be high testosterone?
Well, that's an argument. Yeah, basically my argument is no. It's under liberalism. It's basically liberalism is inimical to testosterone. Basically,
That's a spicy take.
yeah, I think so. But I mean, what's quite interesting actually about the book, if I may say so myself, is that basically I take Francis Fukuyama's end of history thesis and what he says about thymos, and about the fact that actually liberalism basically is inimical to megalothymia, which is the kind of expression of the desire to express distinction, to distinguish yourself from other people. He says that liberalism is basically inimical to that. And my argument is that actually what he's talking about really is he's talking about testosterone decline. He's talking about the inability for men under liberalism to behave in a testosterone fueled manner. And then I say that actually he's talking about liberalism as a political system. Well, I talk about liberalism as a biological system, and exposure to endocrine disruptors, bad food, maladaptive lifestyles, all that kind of stuff. And so actually, basically what I'm saying is that actually Fukuyama's thesis isn't pessimistic enough about the last man, really, about this Nietzschean figure, this kind of crepuscular figure who appears at the end of history. So I mean it's spicy, but it's grounded in philosophy, and I think it will interest people that it's actually I'm kind of taking on Fukuyama.
Yeah. Have you
Who's
coined
actually somebody? He's actually somebody who people read, but don't actually. Well, they say they've read him, they think that they understand it, but they actually forget a large part of the argument, especially the final quarter of the book about the last man.
have you coined the term bioliberalism yet? Because it sounds like
No, maybe I should something like that to describe it. Yeah, I probably need to come up with at least one coinage in the book actually to to get people talking, so that it's impossible for them not to, if they use it, not to talk about the book.
Well, why pick on liberalism? Why not pick on civilization? I mean, what's the difference? Why not say that civilization is inimical to man's, manliness?
Well, I actually do at various points. I do. I mean, so there's evidence. If you look at the paleo anthropological record, if you look at skeletons of hunter-gatherers from 50,000 years ago, the skeletal evidence, particularly like brow ridges, skull shape, etc., general kind of robustness, indicates that actually there's been a very long-term testosterone decline among modern humans. And paleo archaeologists and anthropologists have suggested that actually maybe this testosterone decline basically coincides with the advent of civilization, with the creation of kind of larger bands of hunter-gatherers, becoming small-scale societies and then agricultural societies. So actually, testosterone decline was necessary really for the dawn of civilization, for a move from very small bands of hunter-gatherers to more complex societies. And I think there's probably something in that too. I mean, I do think that there's probably something in that. But equally, actually, in the book, I say there are lots of misconceptions about what testosterone is and what it does. People think that it's just the aggression hormone, that it just makes men aggressive. Well, that isn't necessarily true. I mean, testosterone does modulate aggression, of course it does, but it also modulates pro-social behavior. Uh, Particularly, and this is so I get into the kind of hormonal differences between liberals and right wingers. Testosterone modulates in group preference. So men who have more testosterone show a greater preference for their in-group than men who have lower testosterone. And that's actually been substantiated in a variety of different studies. Like they did studies, I think, of football teams, of rival football teams, and they found that the supporters who had higher levels of testosterone were more likely to have a more negative assessment of their rivals than football supporters with lower levels of testosterone and stuff like that. So I mean, I think that there's that's a big part of the book actually is talking about the kind of the biological basis of left and right, and I think it's real. I think there genuinely is a hormonal basis of left and
It
right, and I think
maps
that
onto my experience. Yeah.
the testosterone decline is favoring the left, and that's part of the reason why the left actually isn't particularly interested in it as an issue.
So, what are the downsides of high testosterone? Like, what's the other side of this? I mean, is it like, can we think of it in terms of Aristotle's virtue, which is a balancing act? Or is that balancing act in itself inherently somehow some form of cuckoldry?
I don't think that. I mean, certainly. So people think, for example, that people like on esoteric Twitter, whatever you want to call it, right wing health Twitter, a lot of them seem to think that actually what you need to do as a man is you need to increase your testosterone as much as possible and get rid of all estrogen in your body, right? So that's what they're like. So they would say, oh, you want to eliminate estrogen, you want to take things like aromatase inhibitors, for example. Aromatase inhibitors are compounds that inhibit an enzyme called aromatase, which converts excess testosterone in the body into estrogen. It's part of the homeostatic system that maintains the right kind of balance between testosterone and estrogen. But actually, you need estrogen as a man. So, and in fact, if you have low estrogen as a man, it's as bad as having low testosterone. I mean, it's estrogen is necessary for brain health. It's necessary for bone health. It's necessary for sexual function as well, which is quite interesting. So if you have low estrogen as a man, you can actually have trouble getting an erection because it's involved actually in regulating the sexual behavior and sexual responses. So I mean. Yeah, I suppose you probably can have too much testosterone. And there are studies as well that suggest that actually men with higher testosterone live shorter lives than men with less testosterone. But there are also some studies that suggest it's the other way around. And there are plenty of studies as well that show that actually men with higher testosterone have better immune function, for example. Like there were studies from the pandemic that showed that men with higher testosterone function were less likely to die from coronavirus than men with low testosterone. So, I mean, it is a balancing act. You do need to have a certain ratio of estrogen to testosterone. You can't just get rid of all the estrogen to make yourself, as super manly as possible. But nevertheless, I would say generally that it is better for men to have more rather than less testosterone.
Yeah, yeah. So you run a magazine called Man's World, and your projected persona is very manly. And
Yeah.
I've been going through a lot of your interviews. I have to recommend your interview with Bo Dade on the Lotus Eaters. Love the guy.
Thank
You
you.
guys have a great conversation. Dive in a lot of history stuff. I love that. One thing I'm wondering about you, there's this question that comes up in right-wing circles called the woman question. And I'm really interested in seeing how the right wing, which is kind of bustling with all these different ideas that are kind of banding back and forth, and there's all these kind of
Sure.
subclades and stuff like that. How you articulate your vision of the good society, the good man, to where do women fit into that? Big question. Wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, it is a big question. I mean, fundamentally, I think that suppose my overall viewpoint about men and women is that they're different. I think that the that any kind of just properly functioning society needs to recognize the biological differences between men and women. And of course, we're heading totally in the opposite direction. We're heading into we're heading into a bizarre kind of fantasy world where men and women are totally equal. Where they're supposed to have totally equal physical capabilities, totally equal mental capabilities too, and I don't think any of that's true. And I think that the more we try actually to kind of inflict this absurd falsity on society, the more paradoxical and the more harmful the kind of manifestations will be. I mean, uh, yeah, it's a broad question. I mean, I see a lot of the manosphere stuff. I don't like the incel kind of stuff. I mean, I don't like, there's a very prominent kind of woman hating
Okay.
element, especially to the online right. And
Well,
I think it,
incel is a broad term. Maybe they're vincels. They're kind of voluntarily in a way, and I think that might
yeah,
map onto what you're talking about in-group, out-group preference. And somehow I think it's unhealthy for men and women even to. You have to hold in your head that we're different without slipping into an in-group, out-group preference, because then that
yeah,
will disturb
yeah.
the
Well,
harmony.
I think hating women is a bad idea, and I don't think that you're gonna if you are. Excuse me. Oh,
You
I
okay?
think that. So I've had a bit of a cough.
Yeah.
I
You
think
want you
that
want to slop an egg? I forgot the word for eating a raw egg.
slonk,
Slonk.
slonk.
Okay.
Oh God. So I mean, I think that if the right actually wants to win, if you want to create a broad-based right-wing movement that actually is able to take power as attractive, then I mean, the nature of democratic society requires that actually you do have to have some appeal for women. You can't present them with a women of their with a vision of their place that just says that they are breeding machines,
Mhm.
and that they should have no rights whatsoever. I mean, as funny as it may be to harass liberal journalists on Twitter and all that kind of stuff, then actually, I mean, a lot of it I think is quite counterproductive. And I think a lot of the incel stuff and the volcel stuff. So that's voluntary celibate. Yeah, is volcel.
Okay.
I think a lot of that stuff obviously is motivated by deep bitterness and resentment about a lack of sexual success. Uh, I mean, there are dread. The sexual marketplace is totally messed up. I mean, I've noticed this in over the last 10 years how much the sexual marketplace has changed, largely with the advent of these apps like Tinder and Bumble and Hinge and Plenty of Fish and all that. The sexual marketplace has changed, and it has become a kind of Pareto principle type situation where you've actually got the vast majority of the spoils, i.e., all of the sex, all of the sexual attention, going to a very small number of men. Um, that's well substantiated in studies. They call it hypergamy,
Mhm.
um, where men will basically mate. Men will basically mate with anyone, but actually women tend to mate with people of a higher status who are better looking than them. And so actually what you get is you get the spoils going to a very small number of people. I mean, I can see where the resentment comes from. I can see
Yeah.
why, when we live in a hypersexualized society, where hardcore pornography is ubiquitous and you're exposed to it from your teenage years if you've got a smartphone, and if your friends have one, um, I can see why. If you live in that kind of hypersexualized world and yet you don't get any action, I can see how it could be absolutely embittering. But nevertheless, I mean, I think we talk about the left as a movement that is rooted in resentment. We talk about Marxism and communism and socialism as being movements that are rooted in resentment, in a desire to overturn the existing order and
Well, they've
You know.
overturned the existing order so many times that we're left with very little existing order, it
Yes,
seems like.
but the thing is that, like, there is a mirror image, I think, of that actually on the right when it comes to sexual politics in particular, where you have deeply bitter, deeply resentful people who actually just, well, some of them want to kill women, and they actually do. And so, yes, I think.
Well, what's your message from your particular philosophical and historical and and biological nutritional point of view to to that subset of the right?
I mean, I think one of the things that's very noticeable about that subsection of the right is that there's a very clear sense of entitlement, I would say. I think that a lot of young men feel that they're entitled to have a partner, to have a girlfriend, to have a wife. And actually, someone like Elliot Rodger, the incel who went on a mass shooting spree. If you look at, he was active on forums, he was active on various different internet forums, and if you read what he wrote, then it's very clear that he had a deep sense of grievance because he felt entitled. So, my message, I suppose, or one of my messages would be that actually maybe you should focus a bit more on actually trying to make yourself attractive to women rather than simply being resentful about the fact that you're not. You know, um, nobody is going to allocate you a girlfriend. That's not going to happen. There's not going to be a government allocation of girlfriends, one for every man. I mean, like. Sex has always been like that. If you look at genetic studies, they talk about population bottlenecks in at various different periods in history, where something like 75% of men didn't have sex, right? Like it's actually a normal
That's a
thing.
historical thing.
Yes, yeah. I can't give you the exact reference or anything like
Okay.
that, but there are population bottlenecks that you can see through genetic evidence that show that actually, at various different points in history, again, we had the situation where actually small numbers of men were having all of the sex and large numbers of men weren't, and were just dying off without being succeeded. So it's not. I don't think that we should pretend that this kind of hyper competition that we're seeing is a new thing, because it isn't. I don't. It's hard. It's hard to. I don't know how we can put it back in the bag. I don't think that it's something that we can put it back in the bag. I don't think. I don't think. Certainly not over a kind of short-term period. You could ban dating apps if you wanted, but I
Well,
don't know.
it
I
might
don't know what that
resolve
would do.
itself, or they might trans
Yes.
themselves out of the gene pool. There's all these different things that would happen, but assumably that's not the good from your point of view.
No, my general message to young men is to improve themselves. Absolutely,
Yeah.
I think that the, and
Why?
that's, well, just because I think that it's a shame. I think that it's a shame that young men aren't encouraged. I'm very, however much whatever you might want to say about Jordan Peterson, and I think that he's absolutely right that it's a crying shame that young men are given virtually no encouragement in modern society. They're left to hang in the wind essentially. So my message is generally, you need to take control of your life. You need to make your life better because no one else is going to do it. You could be something much more than you are if only you would try. So that would be a general message, I think, for men in general. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to succeed. But it does at least mean that you'll try, and that's better than not trying, as far as I'm concerned, personally.
So I want to get a little philosophical just to understand your
Mm,
point of view in the context of like the future, and one of the
yeah.
future is babies. So assumably, a man has a desire for women, right? We'll say
Mm.
most men have a desire for women. But is that good in your philosophy? Is it a part of natural development to mate? And from your point of view, are you kind of are you okay with some men getting more women than other men, and or is monogamy like a kind of a good from your point of view, and is fatherhood a good from your point of view?
I think it's very clear historically that monogamy has been a very, very powerful civilizing influence, and it's been a very, very important influence in the development and the success, the economic success, the social, the political success of the West. So, I mean, I wrote an essay for American Mind about a while ago about polyamory and about how, you know, polyamory, which is promoted very heavily by the left now, is and always has been actually part of the central goal of the left, which is to destroy capitalism, patriarchal society, the nuclear family. So, I mean, I think that a society without monogamy would look very different from the West as it has existed over the last circa 2,000 years, let's say. So, it's a question of what kind of society you really want to live in. I mean, um, I think it's always inevitable that certain men are going to be more successful than others. But I think that as a social institution, then yes, I think that monogamy is better than polyamory and or polygyny or polyandry, whatever these different variations. I forget which is which. I think polygyny is men having multiple wives, and
Wives, yeah.
yeah, and
Amory is just
polyandry is
multiple partners, yeah.
yeah. But you know, um, I mean, there are. You look at statistics about child abuse in polyamorous settings. It's massive. It's right. It's absolutely rife. It is the worst. It's absolutely the worst way that you can bring up children with multiple men uh, vying for the sexual access to the mother. Right. So there was a very famous case. I think it was in 2020. There was this woman called Tori Ajada, I think she was called, or Tori Ajada, and she was in the Daily Mail, and I think in other newspapers as well. They did a story about her, about how she was in this polyamorous relationship with like five men, and she was pregnant, and she didn't know who the father was, and they didn't know who the father was. Anyway, so that was all. There's been a big push actually in the mainstream media for polyamory to normalize this kind of behavior. Anyway, a year later or whatever, after the baby was born, shock horror. Uh, one of the men in the polycule or whatever whatever it's called, nearly kills the baby, nearly beats the baby to death, and it turns out he's not the biological father. And that is what happens. That is what happens, and that's verifiable not only, I think, in Western societies, but that's also verifiable in traditional societies as well. In societies where men have children are raised in that kind of setting.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think fatherhood is especially important actually in Western societies because of the nuclear family, because the family is so truncated. It's mother, father, and kids, and maybe the grandparents are nearby, maybe uncles and cousins are nearby, or whatever. But actually, really, with the nuclear family, you're thrown back on this very small unit, two parents. And I think if you only have one parent, it's very difficult. I'm not saying that single mothers or even single fathers can't do a good job, but it's actually very hard. I think that fatherhood becomes a much more almost, I would say, essential role. I mean, I think it's essential probably in all societies. Older men teach and shape and nurture their children, their male children, and also other children as well. Men are role models. Men teach how to be a man. But I do think that actually, yes, that in the kind of modern Western civilization with the nuclear family, then actually it takes on a more it does kind of become more essential because actually, if you don't have a father, then it may very well be the case that actually the child then doesn't have a positive male role model.
So, in light of your work on the book that you just finished. When is it going to be published? Do you know yet? Is it?
It is going to be published spring summer next year
Okay, excellent.
by
So,
Passage Press.
oh, great. Love Lomez too. Great guy.
Yeah, he's a great dude.
Great that you guys work together. So in the light of The Last Man, or the pressure that civilization has on men and how that can be deleterious, but somehow a man has to be civilized to some degree.
Yes.
If you're claiming that fatherhood and monogamy in Western civilization is a good, then there is some compromise between the Cro-Magnon, absolute brutish,
Yeah.
awesome, figure of prehistory, and this man
Yes.
that's more refined, that has compromised, that is connected daily in and out with a woman, and making sure to balance like what he is, what he's trying to be, with the reality of being in a relationship. So I'm wondering. How do you put down, explain the compromises, both positive and negative, between liberalism, civilization, and the struggles of men to self-actualize? And we already said that self-actualization actually, it goes through. Well, I'm kind of putting words in your mouth, but because you say
Sure.
that fatherhood is a part of the trajectory of man, so self-actualization is actually becoming somebody who's a provider, who's actually
Yes.
not just self-serving.
Yeah, I mean, part of the problem, I think, maybe with liberalism is that what it does with liberal democracy is that it reduces all men to the same level. And obviously that wasn't the case. That wasn't the case in earlier times. I mean, I think that what we actually need to do, perhaps, is we need to make more space for hierarchy. I think we need to recognize that maybe not all men want to self-actualize themselves in the way that maybe Hernan Cortez did. So I think that what you actually probably need is you need I wouldn't say like two separate moralities, but I think that what you need probably is you need like a stable foundation in institutions like marriage and monogamy, but also at the same time you also need some space for something that kind of goes beyond that and is a little bit more in touch maybe with the kind of Cro-Magnon aspects of our kind of instincts and kind of deep evolutionary patterning. So I mean, yes, I mean, I think that obviously there has to be. You can't have complex civilizations if people can't cooperate. That's an obvious truism. And I said earlier about the fact that we have this paleoanthropological evidence that suggests that actually some quite significant testosterone decline, actually, because it's actually visible in the heaviness of brow ridges and the skull, shape of the skull, jaw, was necessary to facilitate the transition from hunter-gathering to, where people were living in small bands, dozens, maybe 50, maybe 100. Maybe less, to larger societies, and then to agrarian societies, and then to complex industrial societies. So, I mean, I think that you couldn't have a complex industrial society where every man was Hernan Cortez. You just couldn't, I mean, it just wouldn't work. So, I mean, my concern, I suppose, then, to return to what I said at the beginning of my answer, is that actually liberal democracy levels everybody to exactly the same level, and it doesn't offer avenues for, the expression of thymos in a more thrusting way. It just expects men. It expects everybody to be satisfied with being a consumer, working a 9 to 5 job, etc. I mean, I don't know whether it's possible to accommodate actually to have a modern industrial society that's democratic, at least, that actually can accommodate something more than that. And then actually when I finish the book, then really I end the book with some probing questions. I don't claim to have kind of solved the problem of testosterone decline in liberal society. And in fact, actually, what I'm really saying is, look, uh, it seems to be it seems to be an unavoidable part of liberalism. And even if we could solve the biological problems, the exposure to endocrine disrupting chemicals, maladaptive lifestyles, obesity, all this kind of stuff, even if we could sort those problems out, I think we would still face the fundamental problem that actually liberal democracy isn't conducive to being a high testosterone man. And so then, Fukuyama says in the final quarter of the book, the section the section of the book that people actually forget, which is called The Last Man. So the book is called The End of History and The Last Man, but people seem to think the book is just called The End of History. Well, it's actually not. That section, that last quarter of the book, is an absolutely devastating critique of liberal democracy from a Nietzschean perspective, saying exactly the kind of stuff that I've been saying about the fact that liberal democracy just isn't satisfying for men who actually want to do something more than just be a passive consumer, basically. And Fukuyama actually says what we will probably see is we'll see immense wars of the spirit. That's what he calls them, immense wars of the spirit. So when men rebel against the kind of stultifying boredom of liberal democracy, and actually quite literally, start wars and try to contend with life and death again in a kind of primal way, because actually it's impossible to do that in a liberal society. I mean, that's his prediction, and I think in many respects he's been vindicated in that regard. You only need to look at, for example, the growth of radical Islam and Islamic State in the Middle East. I mean, that is like a
And don't forget
sudden,
Great Britain too.
yeah, yeah, yeah. That's a sudden explosion of thymos, a sudden explosion of megalothymia in this region where actually, the West is trying to import its liberal democracy and its liberal values, and we're trying to shape states like Iraq and Syria and Lebanon and all these other countries, Iran, in the image of Western nations. And actually, these people don't want it. The men don't want it, or some of the men don't want it anyway. And so actually, they are prepared to go to war, to resort to the deepest barbarism, to set people on fire and throw them off buildings and, you know, all this kind of stuff because they don't want to live in that kind of society. I mean, it's religiously tinged, of course, in that case. It's about Islam as well. But I would actually say in many respects, Islam is a high tea. In certain respects, Islam is a high tea religion, or at least it encourages a kind of warlike, megalothymic expression that maybe, I mean, Christianity in the past has been a megalothymic religion. You've had muscular expressions of Christianity throughout the last 2,000 years. They've been necessary for Christianity to survive, but actually they've been largely purged now from Christianity as the established churches have basically become mirrors of liberalism. The Catholic Church is a mirror of liberalism. The pontiff is like a liberal king. I mean,
Well, could it be any other way?
I don't know. I don't know, actually. I don't know. I mean, it's an interesting question.
Yeah.
But
Let
obviously,
me.
the church is meant to represent God's universal truth against the spirit of the age, whatever the spirit of the age is. So the church resisted Rome. The church resisted the Roman vision of imperium and etc. But now it's kind of, I mean, Christianity, liberalism is an offshoot of Christianity. I mean, there's no doubt about that. That's the Nietzschean
I agree.
analysis. I mean, I think that liberalism is an outgrowth of Christianity. It would make no sense without Christianity. It was birthed by Christianity, even if it's been shorn of its kind of religious garb. Um, uh, so it's kind of it's Christianity gave birth to liberalism, and then liberalism in a way kind of reverse colonized Christianity, which is interesting. But yeah.
So when I interview centrists or the left me kind of people,
Yeah.
I like to, because usually they woke up somehow that there was a bit of a red
Yeah.
pill, and I like to see, well, how based are you? You know, I try to push them. You know, just
Sure.
how far have you gone with that? But I also like to ask when I speak with somebody who's openly right or moves among the dissident right circles or whatever it's called, like how
Hmm.
liberal are you willing to admit that you are, like, or how far back in time would you go to say, oh yeah, that's the liberalism that I can stomach, right? Because liberalism is just kind of this
Sure.
progressive kind of swapping out of roles, destruction or refinement of
Mm.
categories, maybe not
Mm.
necessarily destruction of categories.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, to what extent have you wrestled with and come to peace with your liberalism, if you have any left?
Hmm. That's a good question. I mean, I was brought up in the English countryside by conservative parents. I mean, I think I've always had a fundamentally conservative orientation. I've always had a love for and reverence for the past, respect for tradition, a belief that tradition should be preserved, that things like national identity matter, that being British matters to British people, and that British people shouldn't be ashamed of it in any way, all that kind of stuff. But I mean, my kind of right wing, for a long time it was kind of unexamined and just implicit. You know, it was the kind of it's like a fish. Fish is swimming in water. The fish doesn't see the water, doesn't know it's there. But it was really, I mean, I would say that it was really when I was at university that I started to reflect more deeply about my kind of political commitments and my kind of political assumptions. And I mean, a big part of it was just seeing what radical leftists actually look like. Was just
Just
seeing
physically, the aesthetic reaction that
Just
you had.
yeah, just physically the way they
Huh.
behave, their kind of boorishness, lack of manners, seeing the deterioration of people as well. I mean, like the deterioration of individual people. You know, when you go to university, you know, you're in a cohort with a however many hundred people or whatever on your course, and then you see them for 3 years. Let's say you see their development for 3 years, and like I very vividly remember particular girls, for instance, that I fancied who ended up becoming kind of man-hating harpies, and it was really sad. It was really sad to and it's a kind of meme, isn't it, that you see on the internet. You see this is what college does to like a beautiful normal young girl, and she's you know before she goes to university, she's beautiful and smiling, and then 3 years later, or even a year later, she's shaved her head and she's got tattoos on her face, and um, you know. So part of it was just being exposed to people who very explicitly, outwardly say that they are leftists, and thinking about what that actually really means. But I was at Oxford in 2016 when the European Union referendum happened in the UK, and then Trump, and it was insane. It was
Yeah.
absolutely insane. People lost their minds. I mean, collectively lost their minds. Not just the students either. Senior
Oh yeah.
senior academics, faculty. I mean, it was just. I mean, the referendum was bad enough, but then Trump. I remember. Like the morning after Trump was elected, we got an email. We got a round robin email from the college chaplain. That's the priest who's responsible for the chapel and services, but also responsible for student welfare. We got a welfare email from the chaplain. She was a woman, of course, and saying, "Oh, I know you're all feeling absolutely terrible today. This is a disaster. Fascism has finally come to America. This is a tragedy, and we're all reeling from this. My door will be open all day long. Just come in and vent your feelings, cry if you want to, all that kind of stuff." And I just thought,
Was
like,
there any
what?
was there any like move to, rather than coddling, to, I don't know, we're going to go save America from itself. We're going to reconquer America.
No, no, it was
Okay.
just it was just impotent screaming, really.
Okay.
And there were protests and stuff. I mean, it was quite funny because I mean, I was in a secret drinking and debating society, and I was president of this society at the time when Donald Trump got elected. And I started wearing a MAGA hat as the president. And I can remember walking around Oxford in black tie, wearing a MAGA hat. And I mean, I think some of the people would have killed me if they'd been able to get away with it. I mean,
But
it was
nobody
very
messed with
funny.
you. Did anybody mess with you?
Nobody messed with me, but you could tell that they really wanted to. They
Yeah.
really wanted to. But I mean, as far as liberalism goes, I'm not quite an artistic person. I'm a creative person, and my general orientation actually towards other people has always been live and let live. I will admit to that. I generally have always just wanted to be allowed to do what I want to do, and if other people do what they want to do, so long as it doesn't harm me, then that's fine. Generally speaking, but
Yeah.
part of that, I think, that was acceptable when I lived in a rural area where actually people shared a lot in common, right? That's what you actually don't realize, or that's what liberals don't seem to realize, is that actually liberalism of that kind, of the sort of 19th century variety, a kind of John Stuart Mill kind of classical liberalism sort of variety as an orientation, it only really works actually in a homogenous society, because you don't have to tolerate stuff that would actually and should be intolerable. It's like
Mm.
your neighbor supports a different football team. It's not your neighbor has a 9-year-old wife, or
Yeah.
or your
Or has a
your
9-year-old boy that's turning into a girl.
yeah,
Something like that.
yeah, or your neighbor eats cats. It's small stuff. It's small stuff.
Yeah.
So I mean, I would say that I still, in many respects, retain that attitude, and I generally judge people as I find them individually. I have opinions about groups, of course I do, but I also
Yeah.
try to judge people as I find them individually. But equally now, I recognize that liberalism actually, in the current situation, is a doctrine of defeat. It's a doctrine of guaranteed defeat, I think. And
Against what?
so
Against life or other societies?
I think against the radical left. I think against the radical left. I think you see it. I mean, you see it all the time on Twitter, but you see it also in politics. You see people, including conservatives, deploying liberal assumptions, charity.
Tolerance.
They're generous towards their opponents. They're magnanimous. No, oh, you've prosecuted us. I'm the president. You've prosecuted me. I'm not going to go after you because I don't believe, because that's wrong. That wouldn't be principled. And then what happens when the left gets back in power? They just do it again. Like, there's never that kind of cleavage to liberal principles. I think
Yeah.
inevitably is a fatal mistake when you are dealing with people who actually don't cleave to any principles at all, other than the desire to acquire power and wield it against their enemies.
Well, this comes to the current debate in my quarters online about the return of intolerance, the return of power, the ability to push back against the enemies. You have a lot of the anti-woke classical liberals, as they call themselves, switching their worry toward the right, and worried that the right is going to get power and the right is going to go after their enemies, and then we're going to return to a world of intolerance and a world where like internecine conflict, rampant racism, the destruction of the individual, the destruction of liberty, the return of authoritarianism, not just to bring things back to the 90s, but to bring things back to some sort of ethno state. So from your point of view, how do we go in that direction? Do we even have the stomach? Like, even the right-wing shit posters online actually have the stomach, for example, in my country, to deport 10 million people.
Yeah,
Actually.
yeah. Well, this is what we're going to find out, and it's, I mean, Donald Trump has talked a tough game so far. Tom Homan, his border czar, has talked a tough game, but yeah, I mean, the proof is going to be in the pudding. I mean, because they're going to have to go rounding up people. They're going to have to go to their workplaces. They're going to have to go to their homes. They're going to have to snatch them off the streets, and they're going to have to put them in camps. They're going to have to put them in processing facilities, thousands of them, tens of thousands of them in individual facilities, massive, massive, facilities that are obviously going to be compared to concentration camps. We're going to have a collective cry from the left and the mainstream media of, oh, this is a new Holocaust, all that kind of
You
stuff.
know what?
So, yeah,
If you put avocado trees in those concentration camps, then the left will be okay because they get their $2 avocado. So maybe there'll be like this
Yeah.
kind of balancing act that they could.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that the left fundamentally, or most leftists fundamentally care about the poor. I don't think they fundamentally care about migrants, really. But nevertheless, I mean, they're gonna shout so loud, it's gonna be deafening, and it will require it will require a strong stomach. And I think that we don't have strong stomachs anymore, really. We can talk about it. We can say, the problem is that there are 20 million illegals in the US and they need to go because they're destroying the country. But actually, the practicalities of getting rid of 20 million people may very well prove too unpleasant.
Hmm.
Uh, and
Well,
what will then.
Britain would be easier, but is there
Hmm.
the political will at all to do something similar, or even the
Well,
necessity
so
from
it's
Britain?
interesting. So, I mean, the only person who's likely to do anything like that is Nigel Farage, who has taken control of the Reform Party. He was the leader of UKIP, the UK Independence Party, which basically forced the issue of a referendum on the EU, and then he led the campaign to leave and won. So, I mean, he's a big, his whole political career has been built on anti-immigration, really, and anti-globalism, sort of big statism, all that kind of stuff. Before Donald Trump was elected, he said in an interview in the UK, "I have absolutely no desire to engage in mass deportations. I don't even think it would be possible." I think he said that. He said it wouldn't even, you couldn't even make it work. And
Hmm.
then, so that was a couple of weeks before Trump. That might have been, I think it was September. He said that, end of September. And then a few days after Donald Trump was elected, he did an interview with Winston Marshall, the banjo player from Mumford and Sons, who was
Yeah.
cancelled. And he said, actually, I think 1.2 million people need to be deported from the UK. It will take some time for us to do it, but we need to do it. So I think that where Trump goes, Farage will follow, and other European politicians as well, actually. I think if Trump, I mean, I genuinely hope Trump can make mass deportations work, because, he will provide an example, and others can imitate it. I mean, he's already showed you can campaign on a platform of explicitly saying you're going to deport 20 million people and actually win in a landslide. I mean, there is broad popular support for mass deportation in the US. The question is just,
Hmm.
when it actually happens, can people look at the images on their television screen, on the internet, in the papers, and not feel sick and want for it to stop? So we're gonna find out. But I do think that if Trump starts to make it work, if he actually does start the deportations on day one and it goes smoothly, and he's able to resist the temptation, or resist the
Yeah.
the inducement from the mainstream media, to give up, to reverse the policy, then I do think that you'll see other nations in Europe, and probably also the UK, where the immigration situation is dire. I mean, it is dire in the UK, and it's
Hmm.
really accelerating, and it's so noticeable. I live in the countryside, and you've got sub-Saharan Africans now wandering around little villages and towns. They
Yeah.
weren't there 3 years ago. They weren't there 2 years ago. And now, just all of a sudden, there are sub-Saharan Africans in deepest, darkest rural England.
Hmm.
Whereas, before, these people were um, confined to urban areas. You'd find them in London, you'd find them in Birmingham and Liverpool and Leeds and Manchester and Glasgow and Edinburgh, but you wouldn't find them in some small village in Somerset or Devon. But now they are. Now they're there.
Hmm.
And I mean, the general atmosphere in the UK, it's really febrile. I mean, you had the riots over the summer. I mean,
Yeah.
people are really, really angry. People are demoralized. A lot of people
Yeah.
are demoralized, and when you walk around, you see um, people are having a shit time, and it's written on their faces. Normal people are having a really shit time, but also. Uh, a large segment of the population, or a significant segment of the population, are angry as well, and actually, I think, willing to do something about it with the right
Yeah.
kind of leadership.
Yeah. Well, leadership. is the key, but also the narrative. Is there a
Yes.
Britishness left to save? Like, what is a Britishness other than an accent? An accent and ties to a particular land, weak ties at that. Is there any more stomach for thick Britishness, thick Frenchness? I mean, Americanism is really broad. Like, we are by
Yeah.
definition big tent,
Yeah.
and we're constantly integrating different
Yeah.
peoples into ours.
Yeah.
But I'm just wondering, like from the amount of influence that America's had, especially after World War II, on Europe, basically turning you guys into vassal states,
Yeah.
if you
Yeah.
look in
Absolutely.
certain lenses. Is there any more a Britishness to that would provide the leverage to exclude, to institute intolerance for that which is not Britishness within Britain?
Well, I mean, I think fundamentally, if you're going to do that, you're going to have to talk about ethnicity, and that's the difficult thing. That's the difficult thing in British politics is to talk about actual ethnic English or ethnic British identity. You know, that's kind of taboo, and
Is it?
yeah, yes, yeah. I mean, if you said if Nigel Farage today said, you know, to be really English, you need to be white Anglo-Saxon, basically. Um, then there would be an enormous outcry, and it would harm his chances significantly. I mean, I think a lot of people in England believe that they do, they know it.
Mm. Mm.
They know that there is an ethnic basis to national identity that goes beyond speaking the language, living here, any of that stuff. You know, appreciating Shakespeare, eating Stilton. You know, uh,
Regaling
there is
Nelson.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, I got my
Is it?
Nelson
Yeah.
painting.
Okay.
Yeah, it is Nelson. Yeah. Um, so yeah, I mean, I think it's a pretty common sense. It's a pretty common sense thing, and I think a lot of people do believe it. But nevertheless, um, uh, it's still controversial, and I still think that a lot of people actually they think that a large component of Englishness is a sort of sense of fair play and that actually there's something a bit shabby about talking about race and maybe sort of like excluding people on those grounds and making people feel bad. So I think there's a hesitancy for ordinary decent people to talk about it, but also you have the media, politicians, left-wing politicians, and also right-wing politicians who make it very difficult to talk about these issues. So
Hmm.
I mean, I think that these massive influxes of people from the Middle East, of Indians, of sub-Saharan Africans, is inevitably going to make people realize that actually the basis of any kind of stable, real English or British identity is ethnicity. It
Hmm.
is, the difference is ethnicity.
Well,
And
by the time they realize that enough to take action, will it not have been too late?
I don't know. I don't know. But I mean, I get the impression that actually we're moving to a crisis point. We're getting very close to a crisis point. It almost feels like anything could happen here any time now.
Really?
Things are getting really bad, and you may have heard about the farmer protests, about the inheritance. Have you heard about the farmer protests here?
I saw a picture. Could you explain it for my audience?
Yeah, so there have been these big protests by farmers in this country because the Labour government has decided to bring in a new inheritance tax law that will basically require family farms to be sold to pay significant death duties on them. So before you could pass down a family farm without paying inheritance tax, basically, because the government wanted the farms to stay together. They wanted them to be able to be passed down the generations and worked. And also, a farm that's worth £10 million. When you inherit that, you don't inherit £10 million. You inherit, assets that you could sell for £10 million. But actually, most farmers are really poor, and it's the same really in the US. Farmers work incredibly hard, and they don't make a lot of money. It's a hard, hard, hard job. But now, so the Labour government has brought in this new inheritance tax law, and family farms are going to have to be broken up, and when the owners die, and what's going to happen is that the land is going to pass into the hands of asset funds and corporations, and then you're
Yeah.
going to have an increasing amount of the farmland in the country owned by asset funds and corporations, and you're going to have a renter class of farmers rather than an owner class of farmers. Uh, if you even have farmers at all, I mean, large portions of the countryside are already being turned over to enormous solar farms.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's hideous. Yeah,
It's not pretty.
you just drive through the countryside and you'll see these huge fields full of solar panels.
Yeah.
Um, but also the other thing that they're going to do is they will turn over pasture, for grazing animals to arable. They'll start rather than grazing sheep and cows, they'll start growing soy. And so what you're actually going to have is you're going to have a situation of artificial scarcity where less animal products or fewer animal products are produced, and so actually the price goes up. And
Mm.
that will, I think, be used to wean people off animal products as part of the climate change agenda. And it wasn't actually, as far as I could see, it wasn't actually a coincidence that in the week when Keir Starmer, the British Prime Minister, announced this new inheritance tax for UK farmers, he also announced that Britain would be cutting its greenhouse gas emissions by 80% by 2035. Right? It's all part of the same. It's all part of the same agenda, I think,
Wow.
and it's making people very angry. It is
Yeah.
making people very angry.
Is
there's a real revolt taking place, I think.
is there significant media communications between this will of the people, or is the media class kind of suppressing this discourse and promoting a certain agenda that's in line with this
Yeah,
globalization
yeah,
effort?
I would say broadly the media isn't covering it. The media,
Yeah.
the media in the US is an extension of the regime, but I think in Britain it's even more the case. We have a very closely controlled media,
Yeah.
and uh, we don't have
I mean, you guys have a very closely controlled social media too, from what I hear
yes,
about what you are allowed to say
yes,
and not say, and the punishments doled out
yes,
for saying the wrong thing.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, Britain in many ways is a horrible, petty little tyranny now, and
Yeah.
a very, very sinister country actually. And it's happened quickly. It's happened within the last, very noticeably within the last sort of 15, 20 years. I mean, I'm
Hmm.
sure elements. I mean, you could probably trace elements of it back further, but I think really it started with Tony Blair, 1997, the new Labour government, and
Hmm.
it accelerated under the Conservatives as well, which is unforgivable, really. They're supposed
Hmm.
to be the party that represents English tradition, the tradition of English liberty, etc. And they've just totally sold out the English people.
Speaking of politicians, from a
Mm.
historical point of view, does this kind of era of what you're describing, this place that Britain is in, does it match to any previous incarnations of British polity? And what triggered a change, like a great man kind of theory, or like the will of the
Mm.
people, or is there anything that comes to mind about like a path forward that you could see has already been mapped out by your people?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, Britain has obviously had dark periods in the past. I mean, I'm sure that some people might draw when they're thinking about authoritarianism and despotism, they might look at the reign of Charles I, for example, which precipitated the Civil War, which caused the rise to prominence, to greatness of Oliver Cromwell, as a battler of and defeater of absolute monarchical tyranny. So, I mean, yeah, I think potentially you could draw some parallels, perhaps with that. Although obviously it's not a king; it's actually Parliament. It's actually It's not one individual who is acting as a despot. It's a system.
Yeah.
And in many respects, actually, there's no difference between left and no real difference between left and right in the UK. I mean, it's a uniparty like there's a uniparty in the US.
Yeah.
Uh, so
Does that go back to
yeah.
what we were talking about liberal democracy, this bureaucratic apparatus, this managerial state? And are
Mm,
there, in your conception of the last man or the anti-last man, is there a ground up movement to that is necessary, that's possible to install somebody, like, or even to get one of your princes, or you have a king now, to actually kind of take
mm.
back up and reverse power in a way to reset the system? Or is this
I
just
don't know. I
fever
mean,
dreams?
yeah. Well, I mean, certainly it's a fever dream that you hear repeated a lot on sort of right-wing Twitter, right-wing British Twitter. A lot of people talk about monarchism, that maybe the only person who can really save Britain, who really stands for the British people and British tradition, for deep tradition, is the monarch. Uh, but certainly, I don't know that that King Charles is that man. Maybe Harry, not Harry, sorry, William.
I don't know.
Definitely
Harry
not
might
Harry.
surprise you. He might be
Yeah,
so jaded from his latest love
yeah, he
problems
goes
that.
on an absolute tear. Yeah, but I mean, I don't know. I really don't know what's going to happen. I mean, I kind of despair when I look at the political system in the UK. I despair of the possibility for change. So in the last general election, Reform under Nigel Farage got 15% of the vote, and they got 4 seats in Parliament. That's less than 1% of the seats.
Mm, mm.
Um, I mean, the political system in the UK works in a very particular way, actually, to make change difficult. Certainly, change outside the established political
Yeah,
parties.
change in one direction, not so much change in another direction.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, yes. I mean, you can be if you're this one of the established parties, then you can do all sorts of stuff. You can wreck the British Constitution. You can wreck British legal tradition. You can wreck parliamentary tradition. You can wreck whatever you want. But actually, breaking into the Houses of Parliament with a new party is very difficult and takes a long time and is expensive. And I don't know that you could take over the Conservative Party in the way that Donald Trump has taken over the Republican Party, for example.
Hmm.
I mean, Donald Trump has largely remade the Republican Party in his image, in the MAGA image. I don't know how easily you could do that in the UK. Maybe you could.
Hmm.
And maybe actually what will happen, this is one possibility, is that actually what Nigel Farage will do is he'll end up becoming the leader of the Conservative Party. He'll reach a critical mass of support within Parliament, and then he will make a deal with the Conservatives to be the leader of the Conservative Party, and then they'll amalgamate, and the Conservative Party will be forged in his image. That could happen. I think that actually could happen. I mean, it's looking at the Conservatives currently, to Kemi Badenoch and the alternatives within the party, then it looks pretty diabolical, really. It looks pretty
Mm,
diabolical, and
mm.
nobody really trusts them. They've totally sold out the country. They're out of ideas. They're kind of pissing into the wind, and so yeah, I mean, I could potentially see Nigel Farage sort of maybe hijacking the Conservative Party at the next election, or the election after that. But I don't think there are any easy answers. No.
Yeah, yeah. Would you, if things got so bad, would you go to war or move to America?
I certainly wouldn't go to war with Russia over Ukraine, and
Okay.
that's what they've been talking about. That's what Keir Starmer's been talking about.
Really?
And we've had British military top brass talking about how conscription a draft might be introduced, and British citizens need to get ready to fight for freedom in Ukraine and all this kind
Oh,
of drivel. Yeah, oh yeah. I mean, it's very interesting actually, just how
so we're gonna
eager.
bring in a bunch of young men and then send our young men off to another country to die.
Yeah, it's kind of sick, really. It's kind of sick. It does make you think, but you would be surprised by how eager actually uh, British politicians are to bang the drum for war with Russia. it's a very, very, I mean, they're eager in France as well and in other European countries, but Britain really is has led the charge. And,
Is this
we
for
were,
ideological reasons or some sort of cynical
to
ploy?
be honest with you, I think part of it is just because we are the most direct extension of the American empire in Europe.
Yeah.
Basically, we are the main American vassal state in Europe, and so when Joe Biden gave authorization for Ukraine to use American missiles for long range attacks into Russia, then of course we gave authorization for Ukraine to use our missiles, to do the same. We were there shoulder to shoulder with the US, saying,
Hmm.
yeah, you can do the same with our weapons as well. But yeah, I mean, it's like I mean, people talk about whether or not there's going to be a civil war in the US. Who
No.
who knows?
Yeah.
Who knows?
Yeah.
And certainly there is obviously the potential for violence in this country. It's very obvious. I mean, the
Yeah, I
atmosphere,
was
like I
really
say,
worried
is
last fall when it was
mm,
busting out. Like that really shook me.
yeah.
For some reason,
Yeah,
I
well,
was
it
like,
was,
"Whoa."
yeah, well, yeah. I mean, it's funny. One minute it's not happening, and then the next it's really happening. It's really going off, and I mean, that's what it's been like in the past too. We've had race riots. There were race riots in Bradford in, I think, the year 2000. Bradford is a town in the north that has been very heavily colonized by South Asian Muslims. And I think that they're actually a majority of the population now. Former industrial city, so yeah, I mean, it absolutely could pop off at any time. I don't doubt that, but whether it will, I don't know. I mean, we'll just see. It depends. Part of it, I think, depends on how hard the government pushes. Um, I mean, at the moment, they seem determined actually to push really hard, and
Hmm.
they're pushing on all fronts at once. They're bringing in, like I said, this absurd legislation about inheritance tax for farmers. They're continuing the mass immigration. There's all sorts of other stuff as well.
Hmm.
Economic changes, etc., kind of barely disguised socialism. The economy is doing really badly as well. We're
Yeah.
we're in a recession now, I think. So it's entirely possible that actually you could have a kind of convergence of a number of different factors that actually just pushes people over the edge.
Hmm.
That could happen. I think that could happen.
So your audience, would you say, is mostly American?
Yes, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. For them, I mean, I do have an English audience, but my audience, yeah, primarily is American. Yeah.
And your brand or like the cornerstone of how you've entered into discourse is through nutrition, right?
Yes, yeah, yeah. The intersection of health and politics, really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are you getting more into politics in your thought, or are those two things kind of talking with each other and kind of developing a dialectic of some sort where they're continue to integrate and
Yeah, I mean,
synthesize?
I think I've integrated. I think I've developed quite an integrated view of the relationship between health and politics. So,
Hmm.
I mean, my last book, the Eggs Benedict option that I wrote in 2022, that was a book about the relationship between food and political control, about the Great Reset, really, about the vision of a global plant-based diet, and how that will further corporate control of the food supply. It will disenfranchise people in various different ways, make them less free, make them less healthy. And then the second half of the book, that was the first half of the book. The second half of the book, the Eggs Benedict option, was actually a vision for an alternative, a kind of restructuring of the food supply and the priorities of the food supply so that it serves ordinary people rather than corporations and the government. And, I mean, it's all these kind of issues and the kind of plan that I lay out for, taking back power from corporations, for example, putting it back in the hands of ordinary consumers and also small farmers, local communities. That's actually very, very, that couldn't be more relevant now with
Mm.
the RFK Jr. Make America Healthy Again agenda. So it's really, I mean, the kind of stuff that I've been writing about actually has really come of age. But
Yeah.
I mean, I actually write about a lot of different stuff. I mean, if you look at I've written like 30 odd essays for American Mind. And if you actually look at the variety of stuff that I've written, I mean, it's absolutely not just about food, absolutely not just about health and nutrition. There's a lot of
Hmm.
stuff about politics, international politics, about culture, about philosophy, about history. I mean, I wrote an essay about that guy Aaron Bushnell. Do you remember him? The guy who set himself on
Oh
fire
yeah,
about the
that
Israel Gaza thing.
unfortunately incredibly forgettable act of martyrdom.
I know, yeah, crazy, crazy. But yeah, I mean, most people wouldn't
Yeah.
even remember who he is. But I wrote a piece about that as a kind of example of Nietzsche's theories about bad conscience and how
Hmm.
liberalism has created its own form of bad conscience that actually drives white people to basically as far as killing themselves in order to expiate the sin of being born white. So I mean, I write about quite varied stuff.
Hmm. Is there an
Um,
alternative to liberalism? I mean, is there a next step to liberalism? I know a lot of my really close friends. I mean, insofar as
mm,
we're going to be close friends after I keep saying this enough, is like they're trying to cling to something that is
yeah,
critiqued very strongly by people
mm,
in your sphere, and
mm,
yet the critiques are really interesting and they're on the mark some places more than others, but I
mm,
don't really see the alternative other than basically what you're laying out over and over and over again. The only alternative that I'm
mm,
hearing is to not necessarily create alternative institutions so much as alternative mindset, and to
mm,
plug back into the world in a way that isn't
mm,
this universalist order, but rather more
mm,
localized,
yeah,
more connected, more direct
mm,
connection. And I don't know if
yes,
that direct connection is necessarily based on race or on some
mm,
sort of phenomic marker so much as a immediacy of contact and the
mm,
practice of being
yeah,
embodied, living
mm,
together, helping each other,
mm.
forming those relationships, and then restarting the ethnos from that
Yeah. I mean,
practice.
I have various different thoughts about liberalism and what's next. I mean, it obviously bears saying that actually, like liberalism, there are worse things than liberalism.
Yeah.
To live in a liberal society for a large part of the 20th century certainly was actually a good thing. There were far worse places you could have been. Um, but I mean, what's going to happen? What's going to happen? I mean, I think it's entirely possible that if there is, if we do end up in some kind of kinetic situation, where you actually have people shooting at each other within nations, then it's almost certainly going to be the case that you won't end up with a liberal system at the end of that.
Mm.
You're more likely to end up with something like Republican Spain, with something like Francoist Spain, right?
Mm.
Where you have a strong man. And I mean, people talk about Trump as a Caesar, Trump as a dictator. I don't see it personally. I mean,
Mm.
there's elements of the sort of dictator cult, if you will, of the cult of personality. I mean, he's a towering man, really. I mean, he's a man of immense stature and almost kind of mythical proportions, and so there does kind of necessarily accrue to him a kind of mythos of a sort of great leader and the accoutrements of a kind of dictatorship. but but um, he isn't a dictator. He doesn't have the plans of a dictator. I mean, his policies are, largely the policies of a 90s kind of Democrat, really. I mean,
Mhm.
he would happily take America back 30 years. And I don't think he really, wants to go much further than that. I don't think
Mhm.
he's not going to cross the Rubicon. He didn't cross the Rubicon on January 6th.
Yeah.
I don't think he wants to be a dictator. I don't think he obviously wants to be a winner, but actually, I don't think that he's interested in rigging the system. I don't think that he's
It doesn't
interested in
seem like
becoming a.
you are seeking a dictator either.
I don't. I don't know. I don't know. I don't.
Hmm.
I'm a bit of a. I'm a bit of a. fatalist about it, and I think that we are inevitably heading towards some kind of, maybe not a collapse, but I certainly think that
Breaking
things
point.
are actually going to get worse before they get better. And maybe part of that is just living in the UK and seeing how bad it is here, and just thinking that, actually it's going to get much worse. And then actually, those kind of conditions are very fertile for a strong individual to come and impose order. So I mean, I think that is probably what will happen, and that it will probably be better than the alternative, which is chaos and murder and all those kinds of things. But I mean, uh, yeah, I don't know. I mean, given everything that's happened, I think it's quite difficult actually to make predictions about politics
Hmm.
at the moment. It really is quite difficult. It's impossible actually to know. But I mean, certainly, if we have a war with Russia, then that's gonna turn over the apple
Sheesh.
cart.
I don't know
Um,
who wants that or if we necessarily
mm,
need that, but
yeah, yeah, but I mean, our political class seems to want it, and
hmm.
I mean,
I wonder if America can help out Europe by example, if not by
mm,
direct intervention.
yeah, I mean, I think what's interesting, Elon Musk met with Nigel Farage at Mar-a-Lago, and apparently he's been considering giving Nigel Farage $100 million.
Hmm.
I mean,
Oh,
if he does that, then that will, I mean, that will be a huge, huge
yeah,
intervention in
yeah.
British politics by Elon Musk. I mean, the British government have really pissed off Elon Musk. They really
I
have,
don't think Europe is favorite either. For some reason, they don't like
No,
him.
no, well, because they're constantly talking about censoring him. They're constantly
Yeah.
insulting him and trying to censor him and trying to fine him and control his platforms, especially Twitter. And
Mhm.
he doesn't like it. He just doesn't like it. I mean, Elon Musk has very clearly been radicalized by what happened to his son. And yeah, I mean, he's a man on a mission, and he's the richest man in the world. So that's not somebody sensibly you would piss off, but our government actually has done that. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think it's entirely possible that there could, for example, be an American Caesar. I do think it's possible, but I don't. It's not Trump. It's not Trump. It's not Trump.
Hmm.
However, sort of Caesar, whatever the Caesar-like
Yeah.
qualities he has, and his critics are constantly trying to portray him as Caesar. There was that staging of Shakespeare's Julius Caesar in 2017, if you remember, where
Yeah.
Donald Trump or Julius Caesar was Donald Trump, and it created all sorts of outrage, because he's murdered. But yeah, I mean, I think Caesarism is a possibility. I mean, I mean, sometimes I kind of adhere to something like a kind of Spenglerian vision of history, Oswald Spengler, where you have cycles of history, and it's inevitable that democracy decays into Caesarism and tyranny, and
Hmm.
maybe that's the case, and maybe it's unavoidable. I
I don't
don't
know.
know. I
Maybe
mean,
AI will solve all of our problems.
yes, yeah, exactly. There are factors. There are like wild card factors, I think, that actually, like I say, make it very difficult to predict exactly what will happen. Yeah, AI could potentially revolutionize society, and but also it could create its own
Yeah.
terrible problems. So yeah, who
Probably
knows?
both. Yeah. So when did you hit the scene? But like 2020 when you started
Yeah, yeah. So I had a lurker account
posting?
in kind
Yeah.
of 2019, and it was just lurking, and then I started posting in 2020.
So you've come a
Yeah,
long way in 4 years.
yeah,
Pretty,
yeah, yeah,
pretty well
yeah.
done.
Really have. I mean, things started to go. Things started to accelerate in the summer of 2020 when I wrote my cookbook, Raw Egg Nationalism in Theory and Practice, and that was a bit of a breakout hit.
Were you surprised?
Uh, yeah, yeah, yeah. It was kind of strange, but I mean, I think it was a good idea. It was a good idea because I actually think that a cookbook is a good way to radicalize people.
Yeah.
Actually, I think that
And you take
because
care of the women question with the same stone.
yeah, Yeah, exactly. But it's like, so you're packaging kind of red pill nutritional and political information with recipes. You're teaching people how to cook. And I mean, I think that actually learning how to cook is a very, very important thing if you want to take control of your
Were
health.
you being intentionally subversive with this, intentionally kind of radical, or did it
Yeah.
just kind of make sense
It,
to
to
do
be
it?
honest, it kind of made sense, and also I just found it really funny. I just found
Okay.
it really funny. I was like, you're writing
Yeah.
a raw egg cookbook that's also a political manifesto. I was like, yeah, this is funny. I mean, I started off, it was a PDF that was available for free download, and like
Yeah.
150,000 people downloaded it. It was crazy. And then I made it into a paperback, and then later on, maybe like a year later, maybe 6 months later, I lose track of the time. I turned it into a coffee table cookbook, a hardcover coffee table cookbook, because I thought actually that would be an even better way to insinuate this kind of stuff into people's houses and into their lives. If you have a really attractive looking coffee table cookbook, it could go on anybody's coffee table,
Yeah.
any kind of like normie coffee table, and then actually you've got this quite subversive, radical book. You know, people will pick it up and they're attracted by the images, and then they start reading and they realize, oh, actually, everything I know about nutrition is a lie. I need to become a nationalist.
Yeah. Well,
So
is it necessarily right wing? Is nutrition necessarily right wing? Is it necessarily
no, I don't.
nationalist?
I
And
don't. I
I haven't
don't.
heard you define what you mean by nationalism, and I haven't read and
I,
listened to all your stuff,
yeah.
but
Well, I mean,
it's just kind of a
by nationalism,
localist kind of.
yeah, yeah. I would just say by nationalism. What do I mean? I mean, I think that the nation is and should be the largest and the primary
Body.
unit of political allegiance. Basically, I think that a world of nations pursuing their own individual interest is a better place than a world of supranational
You
institutions
don't think
like
you
the.
think Europe, like Europe, is too big,
Mm, I
but
like.
the America.
I mean, I think that European political communities are about the largest that can actually
It's a
govern
stretch.
themselves coherently. I do think that, like a country like Italy or the UK or France or whatever, that's about, or maybe Germany, that's about as big as a nation can get, and
Maybe
still
Germany.
and still kind of have a kind of common sense of identity, and still have these kind of meaningful ties, and actually have an administrative framework that works. I mean, I'm for European um, I'm for European unity. I mean, I am a European. I feel European.
Mm.
Um, but I don't like the European Union. I don't like the European Union. I think that, and I think it's a shame. It's a crying shame actually about the European Union, because it's set back the cause of European unity, because it's actually it's made being anti Europe a kind of reactionary right wing kind of position across
Oh,
Europe. I mean, I
yeah.
think I think that we could have European unity, we could have closer European integration and friendship and cooperation without having a supranational government based in Brussels that dictates laws and that punishes country member states for not taking enough migrants, and all that kind of stuff.
Hmm.
I mean, I would look at something like the Hanseatic League, for example, from the Middle Ages, and say, I mean, that's how you do a kind of supranational kind of integration within Europe. Like you've got these prosperous Northern European trading cities, and they all work together for their mutual benefit,
Hmm.
because it benefits them. I mean,
I
part of the
actually have a
problem, I
Euro
think.
game I haven't yet played called Hansa Teutonica that I think
Nice.
exhibits that period of history.
Well, but the thing, because the thing is, what we've done with the European, or what the European Union has done, is it's yoked together a whole variety of different countries that actually aren't really very well matched. You've got the Northern European countries, you've got the Scandinavian countries, you've got France, you've got Britain, you've got Germany. And then you've got these basket cases like Spain and Portugal and Italy and Greece, and the Balkan countries. Like they're apples and pears.
Hmm.
If you had some kind of European economic area that included Britain and Scandinavia and Iceland and France and Germany, that could work. That could actually work, But when you add into the equation these kind of feckless lazy
Hmm.
Southern Europeans who default on their payments and don't pay their debts, and then actually you've got a big
There's
problem.
no stick or carrot that can be used to. I mean, how did the Roman Empire spread out that big, and the
Mm.
European Union can't do similarly? They're too
Well,
nice.
I think in many respects, part of the problem with the European Union is that it doesn't have the political power of the Roman Empire. So, I mean, this is something that is often said in favor of Europe: is look,
Yeah.
we need to give Europe more power. The EU project will only work if we give the EU more power. And which are
Hmm.
obviously, nationalists and obviously balk at and resist. But yeah, I mean, there's a very strong strain of thinking within the pro EU community that actually the EU needs to be an actual state with the powers of a state. It needs to have its own army. It needs to
Yeah.
have a fully developed fiscal policy. And I mean, obviously, the development of Europe in the Roman Empire was different. Italy was the most developed part of Europe. Italy and North Africa and Egypt eventually,
Yeah.
but places like Gaul and Britain were backwaters, and so I mean they were backwaters, but they weren't backwaters that were a kind of drag on the
Mm.
empire, perhaps in the way that a country like Italy is a drag on, or Greece is a drag on Germany now. So it's
Mm.
complicated, but no, I mean I'm not against European integration or European unity. I think it would be good. I think it would be good, and I think that in large part as well because I think that the problems facing the peoples of Europe are largely the same. I mean, Europe is imperiled by mass immigration. I think we need a common front, uh, not only to defend our individual national identities, but also our identity as Europeans. That Europe is a continent. Europe has a distinct identity,
Hmm.
and if we could have a common front to assert that identity, then I think that would be good because then you wouldn't have, a country like Germany where the leader says, "Oh, wir schaffen das. We can take that. Cut as many Syrians as want to come can come, and then millions of people come, and they go to all the other countries as well as Germany, and you get a leader like Angela Merkel making a unilateral decision to flood
Hmm.
the whole of Europe with migrants. So yeah, I mean, I think that we need a common front in fighting what is basically an existential threat to
Hmm.
European identity on an individual national level, but also actually on a continent-wide level as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah. With all these nested sovereignties and nested
Mm,
self-interests. So, and then you
yeah.
started Man's World, going back to your
Hmm.
bibliography.
Yeah.
And I want to just like, where are you headed now? Like I guess you got a book.
Mm,
You're working with Passage Press.
yes.
Like, do you have like is it what's your vision of your thing, your ship, your
Mm.
brand? Just doesn't sound like the right word, but maybe
Well, I mean,
the,
it is a
the
brand it is a brand, and that's one of the interesting things actually about having my identity revealed is it's made me reflect on what my brand is, because I was totally anonymous, but now actually I'm a known commodity. Before I didn't talk about who I was. I didn't talk about my history as an academic at Oxford and Cambridge. I didn't talk about, the fact that I'd done a PhD in medieval religion, in medieval Christianity and all this kind of stuff, and the Reformation. So, I mean, I very definitely do have a brand, and now having introduced the personal element, where people actually know who I am, I'm having to think actually about where I take it and whether I still leverage the anonymous personality. Because I mean, I think some people still don't actually know that I've been doxxed, and then they suddenly discover that I have. But a lot of people do. But with this new book, then I'm probably going to put my actual name on the cover as well as Raw Egg
okay.
Nationalist. Don't see why not. Um, but yeah, with my brand, I mean, I want to continue writing. I mean, I generally just have a sort of uh, I mean, I think I'll probably write a book a year, maybe of one kind or another. I want to do another cookbook, actually.
Hmm.
Um, I'd like to do another cookbook that goes into more detail about the kind of Paleolithic approach to eating that's focused on evolutionary history, individual and collective evolutionary history, and
Hmm.
sort of eating the kind of foods that your ancestors ate, and optimizing your diet on the basis of your genetics and all that kind of stuff. Um, uh, but I mean, with Man's World, then, so Man's World was just a digital magazine for 3 years, and now it's a physical magazine. I mean, it's like an art book, really. If
Yeah.
you actually get a hold of a copy of it, it's not a magazine. I mean, it's an art book, really. I mean, it's pretty sumptuous. We're doing another 2 issues next year, and then we're going to move to a 4 issue per year schedule, a quarterly issue, a quarterly schedule. I mean. I got big plans for it, and we're going to really go all in on it. I mean, we've it's been a big success. The physical edition of the magazine has been a big success. We've got a lot of subscribers. It's making a profit. We can start in a way that we couldn't before. We can actually start paying
Yeah.
contributors. I mean, I've been very, very surprised actually uh, at the kind of enthusiasm with which people have contributed to the magazine without actually being paid. Because, I mean, part of the problem was, of course, that I was anonymous, and most of the contributors are anonymous. And when you pay
Yeah.
someone, then inevitably the identity of the
Tracks. Yeah.
giver and the receiver comes in. So that's always been a bit of a problem. But also, we didn't really have very much money, or any money. I can't match the contributors' rates of Playboy or of Vanity Fair or something like
Yet.
that. But actually, we're going. But this is the thing. I mean, we're actually getting to the point now where we can, and where we can offer competitive rates to people who write for Vanity Fair and Playboy, etc., but aren't actually allowed to write what they really want to write in those publications.
Yeah.
So we're going to start poaching big writers who actually are being stifled by these publications that have gone left, that have gone woke, whatever you want to say,
Yeah.
and
No.
actually don't really let them write what they want to write.
I really do think that we have little discussions with this about this
Mm,
online, but I don't think leftism's done or wokeness has gone away, but there is a sea change in the thought leadership. I think that there's
yeah.
absolutely a sea change in people wanting to explore things more open, and they're feeling stifled. So platforms such as yours and Lomas and a lot of these little platforms are going to get a lot of
Mm.
creative energy because it's been bottled up in all these other places.
Yeah,
So it's
well, it's quite funny, So I went to Hereticon in Miami, which was this conference for heretical thought that was organized by Founders Fund, which is the Peter Thiel thing, and Mike
hmm.
Solana, the crypto guy. And I talked about I did a panel with this Italian male model called Pietro Baselli about beauty and the political value of beauty. And then I also did a panel with the Passage guys and with Curtis Yarvin about the future of culture, right wing culture. And it was funny because there was someone and I talked about Manswell, but there was a guy in the audience who was a journalist from Playboy. And he came up to me afterwards and he said, we've actually been paying very close attention to Playboy, to what you've been doing. Would you like to do an interview with Playboy
Oh,
about what's wrong with Playboy?
oh,
So that was quite interesting. I mean, it hasn't materialized yet, but that's an
yeah,
interesting idea that actually,
huh.
I mean, the magazine is styled on Playboy
Yeah.
in
How?
various kind of obvious ways.
Yeah.
Because I mean, Playboy. There's this old chestnut about Playboy. I read Playboy for the articles, but it was actually true. I mean, it was actually true.
Yeah.
Really great writers used to write for Playboy. John Updike, Nabokov, Philip Roth, Norman Mailer. Um, great people used to write for Hunter S. Thompson. All these. It really was it was a style magazine, and it was about sex, and but it also had some serious literary cred, and it was a magazine for tastemakers, and uh, that's kind of the vision really for man's world, to be something like that without any of the kind of cucked any of the cucked kind of submission to leftism and wokeness, and where people
Mm.
actually really can say what they want, can say the kind of things that men actually want to read, and that kind of stuff. But it's like Playboy updated for the massively online 4chan kind of
Yeah.
demographic. So it has
Yeah.
this kind of internet kind of message board sort of
Yeah.
meme style as well, but it is very much in the Playboy mold, and it's
Mm.
I mean, Playboy has very much dropped the ball, because Playboy
Yeah.
really had a captive market for 40 years, 50 years. Even if you look at Playboy magazines from 10, 15 years ago, then they were still good. They were still good, but in the last decade or so, then
Yeah.
it's become pretty diabolical, actually.
So you're in college. You studied the Reformation, uh,
So I
Christianity.
was, yes, I was a historian as an undergraduate. Then I did social anthropology, and then I wrote about Buddhism and other stuff like that. And then
Yeah.
I did a PhD on the Reformation, on parish religion, local religion,
Mm.
and religious change through the Reformation, basically on a local level.
It seems like your work is kind of secular at this point in time. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't want to categorize it, but I'm
No.
wondering, do you see a return or a spot for the religious discussion in the nexus of what you're covering, and how you're trying to formulate a better
Yeah,
future?
absolutely. I am not a materialist. I'm not a materialist. I mean, I believe my relationship with Christianity is kind of vexed and difficult. So I mean, I was baptized Church of England, so was raised a Christian, and culturally I'm a Christian, and I grew up in a Christian society. But and at various different times I have tried to believe. I've actually tried to believe. So I mean, when I was doing my PhD, to begin with, then I thought, well, you know what, I'll try. I'm studying Christianity, the Reformation, in this great depth. I'm really gonna try, actually, and feel it as well. And so I spent a lot of time in chapel at Oxford, attending religious services and talking to priests and clerics, and it didn't happen for me. I couldn't make it happen. And so I mean, I think that if I end up explicitly, say, being an explicit Christian, a practicing Christian, then I'll have to have some kind of Damascene sort of conversion, really, I think. But
Mm.
I mean, I definitely spiritual, and I definitely think that the spiritual is hugely important. I mean, the religious is hugely important. I mean, we can't understand the nature of the world today without understanding the fate of Christianity, the
Mm.
role of Christianity in creating the modern world and its fate in the modern world. I mean, you can't, you want to talk about what's wrong with liberalism. Well, you have to talk about the Reformation. You have to understand what went on in the Reformation. You have to understand um, the impact of the Reformation on thinking, on philosophy, on theology, on social categories.
Mm.
It's very complicated. So I mean, yeah, I think that the void that's been left by religion in public life and in individual life is a big part of the is a big part of the issue, and it's not a wonder that many people who are seeking a return to tradition, or a reassertion of tradition, obviously just think, well, we all need to become Catholics again, or we all need to become Orthodox.
Yeah.
And
Do you think religion's going to be cool soon, or becoming cool again? Because I think one of the things that went out of fashion with my
mm,
generation, your generation, is just it lost its cool factor. It lost.
mm,
I mean, for a long time, it was just kind of following and mimicking the culture at
mm,
large. Now that the culture
yeah.
at large has imploded, maybe there is. Do you detect in all the writers and the thinkers that you're interacting with a spark, a thread, something?
Yeah, yeah, certainly on Twitter, you see a lot of kind of based Christian memes, where it's kind of like these sort of images of crusaders and Templars and
Yeah.
conquistadors and all that kind of stuff, and like the Polish beating back the Ottomans at Vienna in 1683 and all that kind of stuff, the Battle of Lepanto. I mean, that kind of stuff. Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that you can appeal to young people with a kind of muscular vision of Christianity. I mean,
Hmm.
there's no denying, for example, if you look to go back to ISIS and Islamic radicalism, I mean, they made what they were doing cool. They were using TikTok and social media to advertise what they were doing in the caliphate, and the Taliban do it as well. They make TikTok videos of themselves riding around on quad bikes,
Hmm.
wearing high tops, and even the execution videos that they make are styled like video games.
Hmm.
Like some of the execution, if you've ever seen them on, they're kind of unavoidable on 4chan. Like some of the execution videos, and they're filmed like Doom. Down the gun. It's. I'm
Hmm.
not saying that's particularly we're going to be appealing to everyone, but it is appealing to a certain kind of young man, and they were obviously trying to appeal to young men in a particular way, like video game playing young men. It's like, actually, you can go to Syria and blow someone's head off with a shotgun for real. Um,
Hmm.
but yeah, I mean, I don't making religion cool. I mean, I think maybe part of the appeal of religion is actually that it isn't cool. It's eternal. It's not ephemeral, or it shouldn't be. So I think that actually what you're finding is that people are starting to understand that actually the things that are held out as being cool, like going out and drinking and taking drugs and having lots of meaningless sex, etc., all that kind of ephemeral stuff. Actually, it's meaningless. And actually, what you want is you want permanence. You want a root. Um, you want history. You want links to the past. You want something that's eternal. And so I actually think that maybe kind of rather than being staid, what maybe religion can be made to appeal to young people by being anti-cool in a way. It's like being cool is kind of being exposed as a lie for many people. I think it's being
Hmm.
exposed as a lie. It does you no good just to do what is supposedly cool. You
Well,
need to do
yeah.
what's meaningful. What's
Yeah.
you know.
That said, I think you're pretty cool, Brent.
Thanks.
So what's coming up next for you? Where can people find you? On Twitter, online?
So what's going up next for me? Next year, then early next year, spring, summer, then that will be the book. That will also be, I think March, April is when the next issue of the magazine comes out. Um, I write on Substack. So I've got a Substack
What's
that's
your
raw,
Substack?
it's rawegstack.com.
Okay, that's what I can find.
And Man's World website is mansworldmag.online. And as well as the physical magazine, then we have three new articles a week on the website. We're also actually running a Gonzo Journalism Prize. The closing date for that is the 1st of January, so there's still some time. Details of that on the website. But if you write a piece of Gonzo journalism, submit it for the prize, you can win $1,500. My Twitter is babygravy9, and that's probably yeah, I know. Don't ask. That's
I wasn't, then I won't.
that was before I decided to be the Egg
Of
Nationalist. That was
course, of
before
course.
I thought that anybody would ever take any notice of my handle. So I didn't really choose particularly wisely. But now it's I'm stuck with it.
It's cute.
But yeah. But yeah, so go to my Twitter for I mean that's the place where you'll find all the updates. I work for InfoWars as a reporter and an opinion writer. Saturday, Sunday, Monday, but I mean I post on Twitter the stuff that I write, so you can see that
Mhm.
there and go to it from there. So yeah, I mean I've got my fingers in a lot of pies at the moment.
Amazing, amazing. Oh,
Mm.
one last question.
Sure.
Your take on nicotine?
It's definitely a test booster. It definitely focuses the mind, increases attention. There's a reason why writers love nicotine, and I mean Tucker. So I wrote an essay called "One Nation Under Pot" for American Mind about the replacement of nicotine by weed, marijuana, and what a society on how a society on marijuana differs from a society on nicotine. And I mean, I think that it would be better if we were all consuming nicotine than consuming marijuana, because marijuana is a soporific. It makes people passive and pliant. But we're going full steam ahead with replacing nicotine with marijuana. In the UK, I think they're going to ban all forms of nicotine products soon.
Oh,
Yeah, everything, not just cigarettes. So actually now already, if you're a certain age, you will never ever be allowed to buy cigarettes. So they
hmm.
brought in this new law, like, if you were born after a certain time, you can't buy cigarettes. But yeah, they're gonna ban everything: snus, zin, all of it, chewing tobacco.
They're so
Um,
petty and tyrannical, man.
it's awful. It's really, really awful. Yeah,
Huh.
dreadful. But yeah, I mean, I think nicotine. I mean, obviously, there are some downsides. I mean, if you chew nicotine all the time or have nicotine in your mouth, it causes inflammation in your gums. You can get oral cancer. That does happen. But I think that nevertheless, it's a powerful stimulant, and I think used in moderation at the right times, then I
Hmm.
mean, I had
Performance
a zin.
enhancing.
Yeah, I had a Zin pouch the other day actually, and it was great. It really, I was writing and I had a Zin pouch, and it really helped things along. But I would hesitate to have Zin pouches in my mouth all day, every day. Mhm.
Charles, Ren, thank you very
Mhm.
much for giving me the opportunity to talk to you. You're a
It was an
fascinating guy.
absolute pleasure. Absolute pleasure.
I'll link to all your work down below, and you have a Merry, Merry Christmas.
And you too, Benjamin. Thank you.
Absolutely.
That was great. Hey, listen. So when you put out